Today we disassemble my Model 3 to change the upper control arm. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, for today's video, I finally deal with that squeak once and for all. So, let's get to it. Alright, first thing to do is jack up the car. Alright, so you can see we've got the wheel removed, and what I'm doing here is I'm using my Safe Jack stands, and they're designed for lowered cars. What you do is you, well, I've got a video on the jack stands that you guys can look back and watch, but so I'm leaving the jack installed with the jack stand, and that's just so that, just for extra safety precautions. So there's the wheel off, and we'll get to unbolting stuff. Alright, so once you get the wheel off, the first bolt to remove is this pinch bolt that goes across to hold the upper control arm to the lower section here. And then there are two more bolts in the back. This is 15 millimeter, and then the bolts in the back appear to be 1/2 inch. Kind of odd to be mixed that way, but anyway, so we'll pull this bolt off and then get to the pivot bolts at the back. So when you're driving a bolt out and you have to tap on the threaded end, always leave the nut partially threaded on to protect the threads. And if you have a soft faced mallet, go ahead and use it. This one I made, in case you're curious, this is high density or UHMW, ultra high molecular weight plastic. That back section is Delrin, and this is actually a piece of tapered titanium tubing designed for a bicycle fork leg. So I made this many years ago, and anyway, it's a great soft face sort of dead blow hammer. So knock it loose, take the nut the rest of the way off, and I can use this since it's a soft face and not garf the threads, but we'll go ahead and tap that out. Alright guys, so I'm loosening up the pivot bolts for the top of the upper control arm, and turns out it looks like you have to release the upper shock and spring, or if you want to call it strut, mount off from the inside of the car, and that's going to require pulling the plastic frunk out to get to those bolts. So we'll go ahead and do that next. So in case you're curious, there is the frunk removed. I have an entire separate video on how to remove the frunk, but we need to get to the bolts that hold the upper strut or shock assembly to the car, which there's one here, there's one in back there, and there's one up here in the corner, I believe. So we'll get to those next. All right, so yes, there's one here, there's one under there, and then there's one, you have to remove a little rubber cover here, lift up this plastic to get to that one right there. So they are 1/2 inch size hex. So we'll go ahead and remove those. All right, well, you guys are learning as I'm learning. So there's actually 4 bolts that hold the aluminum shock carriage to the car. The 3 I showed you previously, but also this one. This is also 15 millimeter. It attaches in the back. There's no way of knowing that until you take off those 3, try to drop it down, and it won't drop down. So I'll remove this bolt and then drop the suspension assembly out. So I've got the jack once again up under the suspension assembly to hold it up in place because I've removed those bolts, and you can see that the reason I have to take that carriage down is the pivot bolts won't come all the way out, and the other one's even tighter, and I would advise cracking those loose before you drop the assembly, but then you'll have to drop the assembly to get them out. Also, so it should be noted that you'll need to remove these clips to pull this. This is the wheel speed sensor electric lead. The hydraulic brake line is over here. This is the wheel speed sensor electric lead. You'll want to pull that out of the way so you don't damage that lead while working on the car. Alright, so now I've got all the bolts removed and got the jack up underneath the suspension, so the entire suspension assembly, including this upper aluminum carriage, should come down as I lower the jack. So nice and slowly here. Need to disconnect the sway bar link. The sway bar is fighting it, I think. So we'll go ahead and disconnect the sway bar link next. Alright, so once you get the sway bar link removed, the whole suspension assembly doesn't really drop all the way down. It's being restricted by the lower control arms, but you can drop it just enough to pull the carriage forward and pull the pivot bolts out. So that's what I'm going to do now. Alright, so there's my old upper control arm, and so it yeah, supposedly this is what makes these things squeak. So I got a replacement. We'll go ahead and put that on and see how it goes. I had to kind of persuade that mount down with a flat crowbar from the top, being very careful just to kind of, or with a hooked crowbar, to kind of pull it down just gently to get the rearmost bolt to come out. So that's where we're at with it, and we'll go ahead and put the new one in. I can actually feel that the ball is sticky, so in there. So we'll go ahead and put the new one on. So there's the replacement upper control arm, and we'll go ahead and install that the same way the old one came off. So I'm not going to snug these bolts down until I get this upper plate mounted back to the car. Then I'll be able to snug them down. And I don't know the torque spec. I was unable to find it, but I can tell you that they weren't very tight. I just used a small closed end wrench and they loosened right up. Not much tension to them at all. There's really not a lot of, there's no tension load. They're in shear, not in tension. So, but they were just lightly snugged. So I'm just going to snug them back up. Same with the pinch bolt for the ball link. Put the jack back underneath there to snug it, the plate up to the top, and then we'll get the bolts from the top. All right, now theoretically replacing a suspension component would require an alignment, but let me show you something. If you look at that bolt, you see how there's a scratch where the bolt head rests against the frame? Well, each of the bolts has a circle where the bolt head went down to. That one's already down pretty low. But what I'm going to do is line that head back up with that scratch the best I can with all the bolts, and that should put the alignment close enough that it'll be totally fine. I'm replacing the tires on the car soon, so I'll have it completely realigned at that point, but just a little tip for you. Alright, so now I've got the sway bar link reattached. I have to attach the wheel speed sensor line yet, but what I'm going to do is jack up the front suspension to get the suspension arm at its sort of neutral point, and then snug the upper pivot bolts down. Alright, there we go. So I'll go ahead and snug those pivot bolts down and go ahead and continue reassembly. So we'll reattach the speed sensor wires into their retainers into their holes there. All right, excellent. So we'll drop the suspension now. Nice and quiet, no squeaking. It used to kind of squeak as it moved. but nice and quiet now. Alright, so just for grins, I'm going to go back over and make sure everything is snug, just for safety purposes. So, yep, everything is snug, so I'm going to go ahead and put the front wheel back on and drop the car down, and then I will reassemble the frunk last. Alright, so there we've got the wheel side of it done. I'll go ahead and just reassemble the frunk, and yeah, we should be all done. You know, while I had the frunk out, I was looking around and I noticed this is the steering shaft, and see how rusty it is? So I'm going to slather some grease on there just to help prevent future rust. So we'll go ahead and squeeze some grease on there. There we go. And then we'll just smear that around. This will help protect the steel shaft from rusting further. Get it all the way around there. Kind of gross on the finger, but it's a good idea when you run across rust on something that you assume maybe shouldn't be rusty to go ahead and do this. It's just a kind of a good preventative measure. So there we go, all greased up, and that should prevent additional rust from occurring. First we have to put this little rubber cover back on. Hey.
Hey, man.
I'm actually filming this. What you guys can't see is Steve just pulled up behind me. He built an electric Jeep in his garage over the last few years, so that's what I'm doing. Yeah, I changed the upper control arm. Alright, so we're all reassembled, and let's see if we have any squeak. Squeak is gone. Absolutely awesome. Absolutely awesome. So yeah, that was Steve, neighbor of mine, and one of these days I'll do a video on his home-built electric Jeep. I think you guys will get a kick out of it. Alright, so nice and smooth, no more squeak. So here's the deal with this. Initially, when I was getting a squeak, it was pretty minor, and it had this rubber, kind of rubber on metal sound, like a gym shoe on a gym floor. And so I just sprayed the ball links with WD-40, jacked the car up and hosed them down. I had a previous video on that, and the sound went away. Well, then at that point, it was fine, and a few days later it came back. So I jacked it back up, hit the ball joints with actually silicone lube at that point, and the problem went away. But it kept coming back, and so I did some research and found that either I had a split in a boot, and therefore spraying it with lubricant was getting through the split in the boot, because I thought, well, maybe it's the boot rotating on the ball joint. I mean, I'm not an auto mechanic. I'm a mechanically inclined guy. I do some design and engineering work, but I'm not an auto mechanic. And I had a couple mechanics that I read online say, you know what, hit all those boots with lube and see if the noise goes away, and it did. Well, here's the deal. It turns out it wasn't hitting it with lube. It was jacking the car up, was drastically dropping the angle of that ball joint, and it would, I don't know if it put some torque on it or moved some lube around that was inside there or whatever, but then when I would lower the car back down, the noise would be gone for a couple days. So doing some research on Model 3s, early Model 3s especially, the upper control arm, the ball joint will it gets sticky inside there. Now it's not a functional problem. It's not it's not something that it's going to fall apart. It's actually not loose. In fact, it's too tight. So I obtained another upper control arm, and that job that you just saw me complete took me 2 hours. But admittedly, I would say an hour of that was walking back and forth from my shop to the driveway. I mean, it's weird. This car uses 15 millimeter bolts, half-inch bolts, and yes, they're half-inch. They're not 12 or 13 millimeter. They are half-inch. Then it also has one particular bolt on the sway bar link that is 18 millimeter. That was annoying. I didn't have an 18 millimeter wrench, so that was a big fiasco getting that taken care of. So it's kind of a mix of metric and American fasteners. Now that I've done the job, though, I bet I could do it in about 40 minutes. So if I don't have to hunt down tools, and I don't have to guess, well, what size is that? Is that going to be American or metric or whatever? And pulling all the equipment out, stopping to film things. So I have a total of 2 hours in it. But again, I bet I could do it in 40 minutes next time. So I'm driving through Culver's, ordering some lunch for my son and I here. So let's go ahead and order.
Thank you for stopping at Culver's. My name is Ed. What can we get served fresh for you today?
Hey Ed, I'd like 2 orders of 10-piece shrimp.
Okay, just the shrimp, the dinners, or the baskets?
Well, good question. I'd say, well, just the shrimp, but then I also want an order of cheese curds. So my son and daughter both used to work at this Culver's. My son was a manager here, so we frequent this place often. This is Culver's in Island Lake.
Yeah. Hello, 1924. I'm 20.
How you doing? You're not doing fantastic?
I'm sorry?
You're not doing fantastic?
I've been here since 7, so...
Well, there you go.
I'm half awake.
15 minutes before you go home, you'll be fantastic.
Exactly. Well, that's 8 o'clock tonight, so...
Oh, long shift.
Yep. We got a fundraiser for the local middle school, so...
Gotcha. Yeah, when Jeremiah was assistant manager here, he pulled a lot of these 16-hour days. And,
yeah, it's always fun. So, all right.
Thank you, sir.
You know the drill. I'll be right up.
Thank you. Anyway, while I wait for my food to be delivered, I just want to wrap up this video. I'm excited that I was able to do the work with just the tools I had on hand, and that it really wasn't all that difficult. I got to tell you, people are scared of Teslas. I wouldn't be. I mean, I've torn into the car a few times, and the couple times I've had it in to have work done when I had it lowered, and that all the mechanics that have worked on it have said, these things are built great. They're like a Lego set. I've had 2 different people say it's like working with Legos. It's just very logical, with the exception of half American and half metric fasteners. That I don't understand. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this video up. My food should be out shortly, and but yeah, I'm excited to do more work to the car. I've got just shy of 70,000 miles on it, and so these things are going to be coming up, and just excited to share the journey with you guys. So if you have any other questions, just let me know. Leave them in the comments section below. And yeah, you guys have yourselves a wonderful day. Take it easy now. Bye-bye.